Thanks for coming out, everybody. I'll try to just jump right into this. I got some exciting news to reveal at the end. We had a dig as recent as December and found bulletproof evidence of where the lost colony went, but it was filmed by Discovery Science Channel, so I can't talk about it until their show airs. It's a 2-hour special in the middle of May, on May 15th. But I did get permission to drop one really juicy nugget, which I'll do at the end. So it's very, very exciting. Get to share with you what we found and kind of go through the real history from the perspective of somebody from Croatoan. So just jump right into it. It's my daughter Saber there. Context is everything in archaeology and in history. So I'm going to blast through the history, as I know you've kind of been sitting through that for hours and don't want to repeat too much, but just go as fast as I can. So in 1584, which is when your Elizabethan voyages are going to start, Spain was the most powerful country on the planet, and they were in a double proxy war against England. They had not actually declared war on each other, but they were in a double proxy war, which means in the Netherlands, there was rebellions against Spanish rule, and the English were giving them guns and money and everything short of troops. At the same time, the English were conquering Ireland, and the Spanish were giving the Irish guns and horses and money to fight the English. Usually, proxy wars lead to actual war, and in this case, that's what's going to happen. But before it really gets rolling, Queen Elizabeth is presented a paper that pretty much outlines reasons why to come to the New World. As something a smaller nation can always do to a larger nation is pirate them on the high seas, and they theorize that this was the soft underbelly of King Philip. King Philip II, Spain, also has a personal hatred of Queen Elizabeth because he's married to her half-older sister, you know, it was Bloody Mary. Lots and lots of mess with the royal family. They're fun. You can talk about them all day. But she has presented this document to try to come to the New World, not only to rob the Spanish, but also to get profitable resources, whatever they could find. The Spanish had gotten very rich off gold and silver, but even lumber, anything, even if they could just plant olives here, it would be worth it. And the way that they presented it to the Queen was as a science mission. They're really going to try to rob the Spanish as much as possible and find a good base to basically set up an offshore military base. But if they get caught, they're just pirates and they'll be hanged. And it's basically plausible and deniability for the Queen. So she agrees to this. The first two voyages go up to Canada. They really don't amount to a lot. Humphrey Gilbert was kind of obsessed with finding a northwest passage to Asia as well, and he drowned on the second voyage. Now, Walter Raleigh was on another ship on that voyage, and luckily he turned around because they were low on food, and it's a good thing he did because everybody else hit a bad storm and they drowned. Gilbert was on a ship called the Squirrel that went down, but when he died, the patent was passed to Raleigh, and that's when you're going to get the voyages in North Carolina begin. Raleigh never came to the Outer Banks, but he did finance it and organize it and was a major player in making it happen. He sent Arthur and Barlow, who you heard about earlier, kind of a recon mission. There's no women, there's no kids, they're not trying to plant a colony here. This is a military settlement to stick it to Spain. That's the #1 objective. And any other money they can make through trade or what have you is just extra. They landed not at Roanoke, but at Hatteras Island. And we know this because if you read the primary sources, it says they came in an inlet, took a left, and landed on an island that stretched itself east to west, 20 miles long, and had a sea to the north and the south, which is Buxton, Frisco, Hatteras. They give the latitude of the inlet and everything. They landed and lived on Hatteras Island, then known as Croatoan, for 6 weeks, and only 7 of them traveled in a longboat and came to Roanoke Island for 1 day. So the first voyage spent almost the entire time on Croatoan. And this is important to remember because there's a relationship that's established right here in the very beginning in those 6 weeks. They did not build any houses. They lived in military field tents because they knew they were leaving. They found a good spot. They take Wanchese and Manio home. Neither one was a chief. They never fought each other, any of that stuff. And neither one was from Roanoke Island. This is Croatoan. This is John White's map, and you can just see a blow-up version of it on the side. It's always been labeled clearly. It's mentioned hundreds of times in the primary sources. But if you're like me, when you were in school, you were taught Croatoan's a mystery word carved on a tree, and no one knows what it means. Dun, 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 the lost colony myth is born. And that bubble really needs to be popped because it's insulting to the tribe to act like they never existed and marginalize them as a word on a tree when they're real people with a real history that play a major role in American history, and they get no credit whatsoever. The English want to find a place that is near the Gulf Stream for their pirate base, because that is the ocean current that the Spanish, who are already in Florida and the Caribbean, take to get home. You look at this map, NASA, come on. All of that yellow water, that's the warm waters of the Gulf Stream. The blue water and the green is the Labrador Current coming from Canada, which is very cold. They collide at Diamond Shoals. That's what formed the Outer Banks. The native word for it is Onaconin. This is Buxton. A lot of people imagine Hatteras as a barren sandbar with nothing on it. It's actually the second largest maritime forest in the world, and you can grow whatever you want from lemons to tobacco to what have you. It's just more profitable to prop up Easter egg colored mansions and rent them to tourists. So the first voyage, we said they spent basically the entire time on Croatoan, looking around. They traded metal tools and lots of other things, but mostly the wasador, the metal tools are what the natives wanted, because they were building houses and building canoes and working wood with antler and seashell, and it's a lot easier to use metal if you can. So when they saw the English using their hatchets and saws, that's what they desired the most. What the English got out of it mainly were leather from the deerskins, pearls, and tobacco. So they would actually burn and scrape the canoes out. This is a Roshaquan, which is a word for hoe in Algonquin, and it's a whelk shell, and that hole has been drilled into it, and then where the beak usually is has been smoothed down flat because of usage. We've got probably 20 of these. They're described in the writings, but to find them is always exciting. And you'd have a wooden handle that went into that hole that was actually drilled into it, and that's what they're using to till the soil. They have a religion that is not easy to compare it to anything that you're probably familiar with, but they did believe in a heaven and a hell. Hell was called Popogusso, which was here on earth where the sun set, and instead of being a place of fire and brimstone, it was freezing cold and dark, but it's still the same kind of dichotomy. Their creation story is too long to get into, but the reason I'm putting this up here is to talk more about the burials, because it's relevant later. They took two kinds of burials: flex burials for individuals and ossuaries. What you see here is basically a morgue. Those are all dead bodies, and the little statue in there is not a person, it's just a statue called Kivas. It's an ancestral god, and they would remove the bones at the summer and winter solstice and bury them all together in these giant graves and have like a week-long ceremony. So they found one in Hatteras Village with over 110 people in it. The tribes over here at the time when the English came over, you had the Secleton under Wingina, which includes Roanoke Island, mainland part of Dare, Terrell, all around Mattamuskeet Lake. And then you had the Croatoan, who their chief's name was Minatonin. He wasn't on the island when the English came the first time, because he actually been wounded fighting against Wingina's people. So they'll meet him the next year. Speed it up. 1585, you had 7 ships. They don't all arrive at the same time because they spent a lot of time robbing the Spanish. Took 2 ships on the way here, robbed Puerto Rico. But the largest ship, the one Manio was on, he's coming back from England. It's called the Tiger. It wrecked at Ocracoke, and they eventually will get it off the bar and continue. But when this happens, it kind of changes the plans, and they have only 105 men left behind instead of the original 600. because they want to make up for their losses and go rob the Spanish some more. More importantly is command changes from Richard Grenville to Ralph Lane, who's a complete psychopath. So the relationship that the English had built with both the Secleton and Croatoan was very positive in the honeymoon period of '84. This all go down the toilet in '85. They basically burned down the village of Augustocock near Scranton, North Carolina, for a cup being stolen, which I think we can all agree is an overreaction. In the end, they murdered a chief of the Secleton when Gina, under flag of truce, shot him twice in the back and cut his head off. And, you know, it all went down the toilet. But another important part of the 1585 to understand is that while Ralph Lane was doing that, and he was attacked on the Chowan River by the Mandawag, and he was fighting all the time, there was also another group under Edward Stafford, who was not a psychopath, who lived on Croatoan. And it was the English living on Croatoan that rescued everybody by spotting Francis Drake coming up the coast and flagging him down. Lane doesn't want to leave. He wants to get more gunpowder and more men and teach the savages a lesson and build forts up the river and this and that. And Drake agrees and gives him a ship called the Francis, named after himself, to give him what he wanted. And a storm hits and that ship's driven off. He's not going to give him another one, so Lane reluctantly goes home with Drake and they all leave. Now, their resupply doesn't know that that's happened. It's not like they had cell phones. They didn't get cell phone towers in Hatteras till 2014. So the resupply comes in 1586, and they drop off 15 men here on Roanoke Island to hold the fort, like literally to hold the fort. And these 15 men are jumping into a wood chipper because of what Ralph Lane has done, murdering the chief, burning, kidnapping, and doing, you know, what he did. So 2 of them are murdered, and they're attacked by the Secleton. And we know this because when the Lost Colony comes to Roanoke Island, they only came here to pick up those 15 men. Their intentions were to go to Chesapeake Bay, not necessarily Chesapeake, but somewhere in the Chesapeake Bay. It's a deep harbor. It makes a lot more sense. The Outer Banks are great for a military base to pirate ships because you can actually see the ships. But for a long-term settlement, you want a deep harbor where you can bring in big, fat supply boats. So that was their plan. When they get to Roanoke Island, they see the fort's been burned. They see the skeleton of one of the men, just sun-dried bones, and they don't see the rest of them anywhere. Then one of your colonists is killed. So you know the fate of one of them already. His name was George Howe. He shot 16 times with arrows and had his head bashed in. No one saw it because he's by himself, but you don't have to be a CSI detective to know that's murder. So that event's very important. When George Howe is murdered, John White, the governor of the colony, sends Manio, who's back with him again, and 20 other Englishmen to the island of Croatoan. This is before John White left. And they asked them, can you help us smooth things over with the Secleton? And they agreed. The Secleton were living right over here in Mans Harbor on the mainland. That's where when Gina was murdered as well. And the Croatoan go to talk to them, and they all run away. Because they've been enemies with the Croatoan for years. Even before the English got here, they hated each other. Ralph Lane, in his own narrative, said how Manio, he was watching out for Manio and his friends to make sure none of them got hurt when they ambushed the chief and his council, because they're 2 different people. When the English went with Manio to Hatteras to ask them to talk to the Secleton for them, they were hosted to a feast, and they were told, we need some kind of token or badge where you know who we are when we're off the island so that you don't accidentally attack us, mistaking us for Wingina's men, which had happened the year before. So this is just a clear indication you're dealing with 2 different tribes, which a lot of times gets swept under the rug, and there's a very broad brush used that just calls everybody over here one thing, Indians. And there's a lot more dynamic to it than that. Understanding these relationships is critical to understanding why the colony went where they did. So White leaves. It takes him 3 years to get back, a lot of mess with the Spanish Armada. The French shot and stabbed John White on his 2nd attempt. 3rd attempt, he basically hitchhiked with pirates. They spent over a month sticking it to the Spanish down in the Caribbean. They run into Ralph Lane. He's doing the same thing. They eventually get up here, and when they're crossing the bars, none of the ships ever came to Roanoke. You have to anchor in the ocean and then take longboats in. A bunch of them drowned, including the captain, and that was John White's only friend. And they had a mutiny. He said, "We're not going to do this anymore. We're leaving." And John White begged them and got them to allow him to try one more time. And he and some other brave men go, and they make it to Roanoke Island on these little boats. When they get it, cross the inlet, and they get here, of course, they see the message Crow on one tree by where the boats are kept, and Croatoan on the palisade. This is a mystery to no one what it meant. John White knew exactly what it meant, and he said so. He wrote it down that the next morning is agreed by the master himself and others, weigh anchor and go to Croatoan. On the way down, they get hit by a hurricane or a bad storm. The ship's damaged. One of the anchors is lost. The crew was already very, very low spirits because their captain had died and 6 other people had drowned, and they really wanted to leave before they even saw the message. So they never make it to Croatoan. They go back to England. And that's it. No other attempts ever made. They pretty much abandoned after that. There's a good reason why. One, Jamestown was too busy starving to death themselves, but it's also, you got to think about who is Jamestown by? King James. He hates the Elizabethans. He hates Raleigh, puts them in the Tower of London, cuts his head off. Why does he hate the Tudors so bad? Because they killed his mom. That's the fast version of that. So they don't really make any attempt. The next person that comes, and there's actual recorded history of somebody on Hatteras, is Lawson, but all he found was natives with gray eyes who said that their ancestors were white people who could speak out of a book, and they mentioned Raleigh by name, and you know the story. So that's well and good, but it's 100 years later. So you've got, all logic would indicate that the colony went to Croatoan, at least initially. You don't write down where you're going and go somewhere else. So it just seemed logical to at least try to see what's there. And a lot of things that come out during this construction and storms that I've seen as a child because I lived there, and I really, really wanted to get a dig organized and just salvage whatever was there. Even if it was purely native, it's worth doing. And we ended up finding a lot more than I bargained for. Context in archaeology is very important. If you find, let's say, the Nuremberg tokens that were found here on Fort Raleigh, because they were not found a proper way on an archaeological dig, there was always a mystery as to when they got here. They're certainly old enough to be from the Lost Colony Elizabethans, but you got to find it in a layer that everything in it is that age. If you find it when you're doing construction and building a fort, then you don't really know what it is. There was another Nuremberg found in Hatteras by a guy building a bar. When you find stuff that way, it doesn't count. It's just really neat stuff and a great maybe, but you have to have that context under the earth, and that is what the purpose of archaeology is to give scientific proof when something came in. So that's an 11,000-year-old spearhead. It has nothing to do with the colony. I just thought it was awesome. This is a Savannah River Point. The pottery on the right is from like 500 BC. I'm just showing that people have lived on the Outer Banks a really long time. This is an olive jar my great-grandfather found. It's identical to the ones that were on Francis Drake's ships that he took actually from the Spanish in Florida. It contained olive oil, which is something the English really needed because they used it to process wool, which was their #1 export at the time. We did a dig behind Cape Hatteras School just to show the process of archaeology and get the middle school kids involved. They found all that pottery and it went inside and it all fit together. And they also found some spearheads and some other stuff. It took about an hour. It was a pretty cool day for them. Some of the stuff that you dig up you can't bring in. Like on the left are post holes from a piece of a longhouse. We've got 600 or 700 of those now. There's a little bit of a fire pit there. In the middle is a pipe, borderware. You got this stuff here is from the 1700s, piece of 8, silver. You got a native pipe on the bottom. The big long one that's a bone is English. It's kaolin. And then there's a coin from 1730s, I think it was. And you get lots of stuff from that age, brandy bottles, what have you. And then on the way down, you stop getting stuff from the 1700s, and you start getting things from the 1600s. like these Venetian beads or this pocket watch key. All of this stuff is in a native village where 99% of what's coming out of the ground is Native American. These are tidewater pipe bowls with starfish. They usually have some kind of animal, a snake, whatever. And it's all well and good. And what you want is to get to a layer where those things quit coming out of the ground and the archaeology changes. This is all just, it's a fob seal. So in the 90s, this gun lock was found in this signet ring in an Indian village. But when I was talking about the layers, they came out of a layer from about 1650. So while it's old enough, the key pieces, that square bit, that's 16th century. After that, they started making them round. And the signet ring is also, it fits to be old enough as far as the typology goes, but they found it in a layer of 1650s. So you don't know, is this something somebody hung on to for a while and then discarded, or did it get there in 1650? So it's not 100% yet. It's a coin weight from 1644. That really helps you know that you're in the 1600s if you find something like that. And once we got beyond that layer, the first thing that we found from the Elizabethans was this snipped glass right here, although we didn't know that for over a year. They used a XRF machine, and I'll get to that. I'll come back to that. This rapier was also found in the 1650s layer, what we call the heirloom layer. It's a piece of a handle from a rapier sword. It had a cross and a heart on it, you see on the far left. And you start getting these decorative bits of clothing. And this stuff is old enough, but again, it was found in a layer of the 1600s. All right, this is what a rapier looks like, a swept hilt rapier that came from. Then we got to a pure 16th century layer, and it was almost completely Native American. Even the pottery of the natives changed. And in that layer, we have a writing slate with a pencil. If you watch the show in a few weeks, that's not the only piece of writing slate, and there's images on it. We sent it to NASA, and that's going to, just remember that in a few months. What's on there, it belongs to John White himself. All right, this is from National Geographic. There's the Nuremberg Token on the bottom. That's the one that is the only Nuremberg token found a proper way in archaeology, and it was at a pure 16th century level. There's nothing, none of those beads, none of those tidewater pipes, all the stuff from the 1600s vanished. On the bottom right is a 16th century jug. I got a picture of one here. Anyway, the two on the bottom are from, or it's just the front and reverse. That's from Roanoke Island. The one on the top is from Hatteras. It shows a real connection. I always believed that the Nurembergs found on Roanoke were legitimate, but this helps validate it because we found an identical one in Croatoan. And it shows kind of a connection between the two islands, and they're both from the same source, obviously. This is an arrowhead that's been made into glass. There's a lot of European items that get repurposed. You have earrings that become fish hooks, and glass becomes arrowheads, and gun barrels become different tools, and it's really kind of neat to see what happens with the natives. They don't have any more iron or glass coming in, so they use all of it. They turn the plates and everything into something more pragmatic. Jack's Reef. Here's a gun barrel that was repurposed and used to tap trees. There's lead shot. We actually found where they were making the lead shot. We found where they were smelting copper. We found window glass and daub from their houses. It's all there. It's a smokehouse. Oh, there's the jug I was talking about, leopard ware. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of red ware. There's a lot of border ware. There's a lot of pottery, but also weapons and tools and everything you would expect to find. This is some smelted copper that we got in 2013, and it would have gone all the way around and been kind of an oval shape. It's almost 2 inches thick. It's English copper, and we found the forge where they're actually making this stuff, and they're making little figurines as well out of copper, and it's surrounded by longhouses. So all these English buildings are surrounded by native dwellings. So it's not like living next door. They're living totally together. This is from a bandolier. It held gunpowder. It had the leather part of it's gone, obviously, but you have a little bit of brass left over. It's identical to some they found in Drake's Cove in California in the 1580s. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of like little rings. The anglet on the right, they have found one of those on Roanoke Island as well. I think we have 12. And that was for fancy people's shoelaces at the very end that we have as plastic today. The fancy guys had that, but copper was so valuable to the natives, they were repurposed into little beads and necklaces and things, and you find them usually alongside earrings. That's what a pit looks like, the layers I had a cartoon of earlier. And go ahead and reveal something really cool, I guess, something no one's ever seen before. So you guys are the first to get to see this and the first to know about it, and here it comes. So, nope, not that. That's a fire bar before and after electrolysis. I just wanted to show how hard electrolysis is because I'm the one that's stuck doing it. It doesn't look as pretty when it comes out of the ground as it does in a display case. Okay, this is a Saker cannonball. When John White found Croatoan written on the palisade, another part of the mythology is there's nothing else, and that's not true either. He did find some objects left behind. He found iron fowler and basically heavy stuff that they didn't want to lug to Hatteras with them. And one of the things that he found was Saker shot. Now, Saker cannons were invented by Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth's dad, and they fire a very particular size round, the bore size of the cannon. It has a Tudor rose stamped on the barrel. Well, sure, it would be nice to find that cannon. We know that they had one. We've always known that because you don't have Saker shot without a Saker cannon. And on the right is a piece of a Saker cannon ball found in the Croatoan Indian village at the bottom. So there's no reason for them to have that other than the colony. None of the other guys who lived there briefly in 84 or in 85 were using cannons, and along with all the other evidence we got, it's just one of this basically did not make the 2-hour show because they have much better things, and I was allowed to share this one nugget of one of the things that we found most recently that's really cool. So it's all very, very straightforward, logical story. You just have to erase the play from your mind. People are introduced to fiction first, and then it influences how you read history. If you can come at it with a blank slate, if you took people who had never heard of any of this, college kids who were somehow from out west, and they just studied the primary sources and read them front to back, none of them would say there's a mystery here. It's abandoned is a more appropriate, abandoned for sure, but it's very obvious from all the sources that they just went to Croatoan like they said, and now their stuff is being found there, both in the heirloom layer of the 1650s, but also in a pure 16th century layer as well, and it's what's been maintained on the island always. So it's still a mystery. There's still, you don't know, if it was that all of them or just like 40 of them. You don't know how many of them died before they went down there. You don't know a lot of things. You're never going to know everything. But I don't really care about that. My point in doing this, like I said in the beginning, is for the Croatoan to stop being lost, because they became lost the same time that the colony became lost. And when they were reduced to just one word on a tree, and they don't tell you that the English lived there before, or that Manio was from there, or that they went to them to get help when George Howe was killed. None of that. It's all there in the primary sources, but it's just been swept under the rug and replaced with, they vanished, and there's this spooky word. You see Croatoan in horror stories, and it's associated with dark arts and all this bull, and it's time for that to stop. So if you were from Hatteras Island and your people came from them, it would upset you too. So that's my axe to grind. Any questions? That's right, I forgot to mention the most important person. Mark Horton has been with us for 12 years. We did not dig for 2 years because of COVID, and he's got a host of people that come down with him, Bruce Kaiser and Henry Wright, and if you know these people are, great. There's just so many different colleagues that he brings and students, and we needed them. We needed credibility. We needed guys that have the PhDs to come and dig these folks up. Otherwise, no one would ever listen. And it's a really weird vibe because about 50% volunteers and about 50% students and professionals from overseas, and just hanging out in the woods with basically a bunch of surfers from Hatteras and digging up Indian Village.